In 1977, Maryann Gray was a 22-year-old school grade in her entire lifetime front of her, while a slight boy darted out in front line of her vehicle. For year, Maryann didn't say on Brian, but she mind on him always, and his die has had a steady impact on her lifetime. I was in a amazing sentiment how date. I was driving of the slight school city of Oxford in Village, Ohio, in a big old incoherent building in Cincinnati in a bundle of some human beings. I was so agitated. I'd been in grade high school, but I'd solved I was departure to keep. I was lucky, not knowledge, which was upcoming following. I was departure to get a work, include entertainment, see wherever my passions led me. I was at the building, we named it, and city community, art, the chamber I was driving in. While I completed I'd driving behind to my flat in Oxford that was all packed up and prepared for the go. It was a hot day in June, and it would be large to get afloat. The way begun out as highway but rapidly became a village railway, one alley in every line. The rate range was 45 or 50 mph, quite quick for how type of way. It was rather lively, and I was in a link of cars making the rate range. I gone a slight advanced post of houses whose mailboxes were on the contrary party of the road. As I gone the houses, a slight blond boy darted driving of the inbox to his building. I saw him at the recent other. I tested to displace. Down there was no way to miss him. I hit the slight boy and he flew up in the air and later mundane on the sidewalk. I stretched above and ran through the road. I was so disappointed how I don't very recall such protocol. I was concealment over a bush and shouting. I heard myself and I mind, which is how? Someone's making how? And later I implemented it was me. The boy was reception at first aid in the way. Down there were a lot of human beings visiting to him and human beings collection on the party of the way. I was really scared. I knew I had made thing horrible. It took 20 protocol for the police force to come. They didn't expect for an emergency, they fair put the boy in the behind of a police force car and leftward. I'd hit the boy law in front line of his building and several neighbors had lost to get his mom. She came out of her building shouting her child's behalf in throw. She requested to go to him but the neighbors detained her behind. Later she begun to crash on her front line slouch and they had to conduct her up. It was noisy, it was embarrassed, it was really disturbing. I closed the police force. I came striker, grown my brush and told, I did it, I did he. They didn't aware I was the one who hit him, I wonder no saw it. They sat me in the behind of a police force car and put a newcomer up front line to hold an eye on me. I wrote out a declaration and talked to them at several long. They looked for slip symbolism on the way and took several measurements. The conduct official came behind and told, I fair include to speak you the boy dead. I'd been supplication how perhaps it wasn't as bad as it looked, how perhaps he would be okay. I recall fair propensity above and weeping, and later hard really difficult to get conduct of myself. The police force coordinated to let me expect in one of the neighbors' houses. She was so type. She had a child fair a few year junior rather than me and I believe she knew how her child could fare as readily include been the offender, love me, or the sacrifice, Brian was his behalf. The conduct official came and said me how they were not breathtaking me, down there was no sign how I was careless or stray or hard of hearing in any way, but he gave me a slight class proverb. The kid dead, how's a horrible item, you requirement to do certainly how you never do the once again. I was cute irate since the concept how I would do it once again was fair for understanding. I named my parent in New York town and I said my mom which had happened. I was weeping and I told, it was an crash, it was an crash. And my mom told, of year it was an crash. My dad came out the following date. He done a sympathy urge to the household how had lose their kid that must include been incredibly morbid. He stopped by the neighbor's building to appreciate them for creature so type to me. He dealt in the car that had to go to a flesh store. He got a attorney, so how if down there was departure to be any legislative activity I would include protect. He fair tested to do certainly how could be undertaken thoroughness of was undertaken thoroughness of. I consumable the at first overnight at a boyfriend's building, compulsively expressive the history of which happened, and later I went behind to my flat, the one how was all packed up and not a really merry location, and mainly hid down there for on a 1 week. I'd really lot been a nice lady who treated difficult to get nice grades and perform the consumer expectations of my parent and my professors, but I believe I grew up sense love I ever came up a slight brief, and so following the crash I believe I was deep concerned at a really subconscious standard on if I was a nice man or if I was a bad man. Down there's a faith framework how lot human beings stick to how we build the state of our lives, so an irate man perceives an irate or enemy planet, and a fond man experiences a type, giver planet. So I mind, which type of a man has the expertise? I must be a really hazardous man. While I got my car behind I tested to driving but I stored hallucinating. I would be drive downward the way and believe I saw someone walk in the road, so I'd helmet on the brakes, but down there would be no down there. How's a really hazardous item to do? I was so scared I gave up the car for on 2 year. I had flashbacks how would pop in my marrow suddenly. I could be in the medium of a talk, wash the dishes, or making the grocery trading, and all of a flash I would be visualizing the kid flyer via the air following I hit him, or a pool of bloodstream on the way, terrible images. I consumable few year punisher myself by very enterprising human beings off of me. I dated back men who purified me really hardly, I didn't very include friends, I was grumpy a many, and my housemates didn't especially delight possessing me about, so I excited out of the community in and flat wherever I could fair be by myself. 2 year following the crash I excited to California to begin a various grade program in psychological and how very was a new start. I was smart betrothed and making job how I thick felt was essential and useful and how thick felt very nice. I cute lot stopped speaking on the crash, on consultation of my parent, who told how if human beings knew I had made that they would believe on me otherwise. I frequently relate to the slight little boy, Brian, as my phantom, since he became a portion of me. His vote in my reason became the really retaliatory, irate vote how would tell, dong ti get too lucky, recall which happened the recent period you got lucky? You annihilated a kid, you annihilated me. I heard how vote lot times each date, and so though I enjoyed my teaching and I favorite residing in California, down there was ever how vote keeping me behind. I had annihilated a kid and I could never overlook how. I mind on Brian the day I got marital. I mind on Brian the day my dad dead. I mind on Brian the day I protected my thesis. I mind on Brian the day I begun a new work. He lived in me. I marital in my previous 30s. I said my man how I'd had the crash but we never talked on it. He didn't ask and I didn't wish to levy my ache on him, though was my question to transactions in and I didn't very sense I had the law to ask for convenience. Up the crash I couldn't include imaginary a lifetime out of family. I was the largest to demand nanny in the neighborhood while I was at top high school. I favorite making it, I would quite nurse rather than go out in friends. For how at first 1 week following the crash while I was concealment within my flat, I heard a vote. I urge it an acoustical delusion. The vote told in the really Bible, old bequest, irate path, thou include undertaken a kid of his mom and as yours penalty you can never include yours own kid. I didn't say on how for at low 20 year. For all how period. I was really terrible about family, all I could see were the abrupt corners how they might drop versus, or the swimming pool wherever they might sink, the stairs how they might drop downward, the blade how they might cut themselves in. I didn't wish to lift a scared kid and I didn't believe I would be a nice mom, so I solved versus possessing family that is a enormous pity, but was the law judgment for me. I believe I would include had a really difficult period maternal. I requested to get via a set of lifetime benchmarks how are cute common, complete my formation, get a nice job and discover a lifetime affiliate, and quickly following, In the mid to deceased 90s, I solved it was period to go in treatment. I had transferred these memories about in me and they had undertaken above a big portion of my internal lifetime and stored me individual of some human beings. My friends knew I was a nerve motorist, but they didn't aware reason. I might be sense downward one day and the crash would be on my reason but I couldn't say on it. Human beings mind they knew me but I didn't say on perhaps the largest considerable occasion in my lifetime. In 2003 down there was an crash at Santa Monica Farmers Marketplace. An old man had plowed in a team of human beings in his car and lot of human beings had been annihilated and injured. I lived neighboring and we were observer the news story scope on TV and could listen the helicopter elevated. It was fair bloodbath, it was a horrible stage. Human beings were on the TV shouting how the 86-year-old man was a killer, but the concept how he intended to do it fair frightened me. I was disappointed by the crash and it was on my reason so lot how I closed the doorway to my office space and banged out several speech on the sympathy I thick felt for the motorist as so as the victims, on my expertise, and on the absence of supporting for human beings who include casually annihilated some human beings. At the period I was in a written seminar, and I shipped which I'd spelled to the female who led my team. She named and told, thou should email the to domestic social wireless. If I had mind down there was any opportunity how they would in fact run it I'd perhaps never include made it. But I shipped it off and the following item I knew NPR were inviting, request me to go in and recording the chunk. I was really concerned on it but I mind someone necessary to show several sympathy for the guy and other who had casually annihilated. The chunk was speak 2 or 3 days following the crash. I was said how I should be produced for loath post, for adverse comments on the web, for human beings inviting to bother me. But which happened was fully favorable, down there was a enormous effusion of supporting. Shut friends how I had never said heard me on the wireless and were evenly merciful and supporting. They said me I was powerful for talk out and how they were so disappointed I had incurred. Thing blossoming within, I thick felt a large feeling of ease and lot more than associated to the human beings about me, and to the planet. It was love upcoming of. I as well heard of some human beings who had casually annihilated human beings and someone D had experiences such to pit, the position traumatic symptoms, the flashbacks, sense severed, challenge concentrating, or, of year, fault and embarrassment. It was really strong since no of us had always talked to nobody someone D had the identical expertise. I had mind on contact Brian's household for year but had detained behind since I wasn't certainly how they would wish to listen of me. I didn't include a lot of cash, but I did do a nameless gift of few $1,000s to his siblings' school to pay portion of his training. Later on 10 years ago I went to Israel on a travel. I'm Hebrew and I went in my rabbinical and some human beings of the shrine how I belonged to. Time I was down there I took a Jew behalf, bracha, that tool bless. I chose it in honor of Brian. While I got household I wrote a email to Brian's mom. I said her I had undertaken the behalf to honor the ram of her child, how Brian lived in my cardiac as I knew he did in her. I shipped the email. It rotated out how she had dead, so her post was creature sent to her surviving child, Brian's older sibling. One day I was meeting in my office space, I selected up the telephone and it was him. Same D recite the email and found me on the internet. We tell for on 45 protocol. It was an emotion talk. He was really irate, he said me how lot his household had incurred. They had stopped celebration Yuletide since it was too shut to Brian's date of birth and all the normal lucky household occasions were muted for them ever. They never modified Brian's chamber, they stored it the identical, so down there was a continuous remind of their child. No of them always very stopped mourning. As we talked he very relaxed. He hadn't named I'd done a sympathy urge and had a short talk in his dad in the days following the crash. His dad had been really type to me and how had a big effect on him. At the end of the talk I told, which do you wish to ask me? You can ask me whatever. He told, Were you acceleration? And I told, not, I wasn't acceleration. I'm disappointed, I'm so disappointed, but your sibling darted out in the way. He told, I aware. Incorrect period, incorrect location. In how time I thick felt pardoned, and I believe maybe he was capable to sense a type of clean sorrow, untinged by the wrath how had color his weeping. While we got off the telephone I surely didn't sense love, we were friends, but I thick felt love, we had the wonderful ties, since we were yet weeping the kid, and we will ever include how in overall. I do pardon myself, but I'm frightened how I'll wound someone else. I dwell in Los Angeles, and I driving all the period, but I'm really careful. I include tested to honor Brian, his household, and my own expertise by achieving out and creature a superior man, but I don't believe I'll always be at world in the reality how I annihilated a kid. I will never stop to be frightened by how. All photographic politeness of Maryann Gray.